Today, based on information developed by that investigation, a Fulton County grand jury returned a true bill of indictment, charging 19 individuals with violations of Georgia law arising from a criminal conspiracy to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election in this state. The indictment includes 41 felony counts and is 97 pages long. Please remember that everyone charged in this bill of indictment is presumed innocent. Specifically, the indictment brings felony charges against Donald John Trump.
Stand up.
Well, there you have it. It's the fourth indictment by this disgraced president late last night at the 11 o'clock hour. Had to go back and redo the opening of today's show because I just had to start it with that clip from Fani, Willis, the Fulton County District Attorney, announcing the latest indictment against former President Donald Trump and 18 others, including Rudy Giuliani. Yay! It's about time he got his over his attempts to overturn the results of the 2020 election on Monday. Trump charged with 13 felonies, including violation of the Georgia RICO Act, filing false documents, false statements and writings, conspiracy to commit impersonating a public officer, and conspiracy to commit forgery in the first degree on Monday. That's a lot. Also, like I said, Giuliani, Mark Meadows, Jeffrey Clark, Jenna Ellis, Johnny Eastman, Sidney Powell, and many more whose names you might not have heard of, surprisingly. Disappointingly, Lindsey Graham, not one of them. I'll have reactions to it. I'll read a few reactions to it coming up in a second, but just want to mention I've got great guests joining me on today's show. The authors of The Hate Next Door, Undercover Within the New Face of White Supremacy, Matson Browning and his wife Tawni Browning join me today. Talk about how their undercover work has identified so many white supremacists, and it's a really interesting book and interview with both Matson and Tawni Browning. Also, just want to quickly mention the hangout this week will be Wednesday night, not Thursday, because we're bringing our daughter Ava to college on Thursday. The tears continue, but I'm really excited for her doing that. Also, if you want to hang out with me in person, I'll be down in the D.C. area August 25th to 27th and performing in Iowa City on September 7th, so you can learn more about that. I'll promote it on all of my social media and in today's show notes and everyday's show notes up until September 7th, Iowa City. Hope to see you there. Lots of other news issues I want to mention, but let's just get some reaction to last night's news. Neil Katyal tweets, Trump is not only indicted, his name is mentioned 193 times in the indictment, and the charges go out of the way to show Trump directly violated the law. Senator Chuck Schumer writes, the fourth indictment of Donald Trump, just like the three which came before it, portrays a repeated pattern of criminal activity by the former president. Released a statement with the House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries. Rick Wilson, the Lincoln Project, I can't wait to see the co-defendants in the Georgia indictments. Everything Trump touches dies. David Rothkopf, it's striking that the Fulton County indictment is so sweeping, involves so many people, and yet seems so grounded in activities we knew about, and has a narrative that rings so true. It reflects the reality of Trump criminal organization crimes as we knew and know them to be. Chris Hayes, Rudy Giuliani catching a RICO charge. What a world. Mara Quint, you ever feel like you're just a total failure? Like, I've never even gotten one indictment. Eric Siegel, the indictment is way too long to summarize on Twitter, but in a nutshell, Trump is accused of being part of a criminal enterprise with his chief of staff and lawyers. 41-count indictment. Josh Marshall writes, a helpful and proper reminder that trying to change the result of a free and fair election is a crime. Indeed, in a democratic republican, it is among the gravest of crimes. Michael Cohen, very active on Twitter last night, our friend, not his former lawyer. Trump has been indicted 4 times in 4 different jurisdictions. It's hard to quantify the utter contempt to which Republican politicians view their supporters, that they would peddle this bullshit that it's all just a political witch hunt by Democrats. Comedian and comedy writer Mike Royce, I don't know how many indictments is bad, but I feel like this one is bad. Jay Black, to the crazy cuckoo people, this is what happens with real conspiracies. There are endless paper trails, and eventually they unravel. George Soros isn't trying to put 5G in your RNA, but 19 dum-dums really actually did try to destroy a democracy. All right, that's just a quick roundup of reactions late last night, and so I'll be talking more about it. I'm sure you'll be paying a lot of attention to it. We'll be hearing from you, I hope, on Wednesday night at the Hangout, on Discord, and on social media. But here's the part I had originally recorded to start today's show. All right, the show is officially open. Thank you very much to everybody who reached out to me with guest ideas, show ideas, and congratulations on the 900th episode. Very kind, very generous, and a lot of great ideas. Several of you thought I should reach out to Ryan Bussey's boys, who were plaintiffs in this historic landmark case that was decided yesterday in a Montana court. A huge win for the planet, for climate. Young kids, the plaintiffs in this case, Held versus Montana. And I have reached out to them even more urgently and imminently. I've just posted a Can You Talk Real Quick episode with Professor Michael Gerard of Columbia University, an expert on the issue of climate law, about this case. So you can go listen to that right now. It is posted, it's up and available, and I'll continue to post those types of episodes whenever I can, when there is some major important breaking news story, or when I just want to reach out and talk to somebody real quick and think it's worth sharing with you. Maybe it's you. But yeah, thank you for all the suggestions. A couple of you suggested we get together with the Hue again, and I would love to do that. The ladies of the Hue, you've been officially invited, and we'll make it more official off air. Okay, the other, of course, huge story was last night, breaking very late into the night, and I'm not sure where it's at right now because it's 11 p.m. when I'm taping this part of the program. Georgia grand jury probing Trump's election subversion returns indictment is the headline at Reuters. The grand jury in Georgia investigating Donald Trump's attempts to overturn a 2020 election loss handed up a criminal indictment on Monday that was unclear whether the charges involved the former president. At this point, we might know more. Probably will know a lot more. So I'm going to stop talking about that right now, and I'll get it to the reactions to it from experts and sound bites for you on tomorrow's show. Two huge stories yesterday in legal cases, one on climate, one on Trump. They're both really inconsequential, I guess I should say. Other news on Trump world and Trumpland. For his part, he attacked the judge handling the election conspiracy case, despite being warned that he refrained from inflammatory attacks against those involved in his case. And federal prosecutors also accused Trump of seeking, quote, special treatment that no other defendant would receive in the Mar-a-Lago classified documents case. In other important news, the death toll in the Maui, Hawaii wildfires has reached 96 as Hawaii mourns the dead. Big story I saw going viral just in the channels and people I follow is my old friend Charlotte Alter writing at Time Magazine. The title, "She wasn't able to get an abortion. Now she's a mom. Soon she'll start 7th grade." Crazy story I see a lot of people talking about. I actually haven't read yet, but I just wanted to mention it. I'll read it and try to get Charlotte here on the program. Headlines out of the war in Ukraine. Russia fires warning shots and boards a cargo ship in the Black Sea, a civilian cargo ship. That's pretty crazy news. In Argentina, they got a Trump mimic who is going to become the biggest primary election vote getter for prime minister there. He's won a primary election. Far-right Javier Milei is his name. That's pretty terrible, crazy, scary news. But let's end on some good news coming back here to home. The Coast Guard says that 4 divers who went missing off the South Carolina coast have been found alive. I always like to end with a good news story. How about that before I get to today's guest? Let's do that now, shall we? And remember, I cannot do it without your paid subscription. So that is my advertisement on today's show. Soon the show will probably have ads. I'm working on doing a deal, and that should start in September. If you don't want ads, let's sign up right now. Go to patreon.com/PeteDominic. Get the free, ad-free episode every day. All right, Matt Browning is my guest, along with his wife, Tawni Browning. They've written a new book, The Hate Next Door, undercover within the new face of white supremacy. He's a former police officer, now works undercover to identify white supremacists. He and his wife founded the Skinhead Intelligence Network, a global information sharing network for law enforcement. She's also works in television, produces television, including undercovering some of the sexual abuse in certain religious communities and polygamist communities. Fascinating couple who have written this book, and I had what I think is a really good conversation with them. There was some small disagreements around a couple of things, which I think made the conversation interesting, especially around gun violence and what can be done around that at the end of our conversation. But I think this one is really worth it. I learned a lot in talking to them. It's a fascinating book and work, and I'm glad that we have these undercover agents doing this very dangerous work that needs to be done, unfortunately. So, more information about Mattson and Tawni and the book in the show notes that you can go to every day's show episode. Let's do it right now for the first time. Matt and Tawni Browning on Stand Up.
Congratulations on publishing this book, which is super important. And I'm so happy to have you joining Stand Up for the first time. Welcome, folks.
Thanks for having us.
People say that it might be hard for a married couple to work together. But that, you're thinking about maybe an accounting firm or a legal firm or, I don't know, a cleaning business or something. You guys are working in a dangerous kind of business and with dangerous people and together. So I ask you, Tawni, what is the secret to a healthy marriage?
Now that's a loaded question. The secret to working together is that we really are, but we are stronger together. We really are.
It's probably really important that you're so interested in this subject, this issue, care so much about it, become experts on it, Mattson, that the fact that probably keeps your marriage strong. No shortage of important issues to talk about with your wife, I'm guessing.
Well, it's actually not talking about that important stuff that keeps us together. I mean, we go out and do all this stuff, all the time. We talk about it. We've infiltrated. We've done what we've done. But it's actually getting outside of it and understanding that, the world isn't full of hate. The world isn't full of these extremes. And we can relate to that. And that's, I believe, what brings us closer together.
Yes, that makes perfect sense. Of course, you're not constantly talking about hate groups while you're making dinner for your children.
Well, there's been times.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's times where he's was so engrossed in the work.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I was like, what's up? What's going on? And I'm like, if I can get some of this information, then can we go do something that I want to do? So, some of it started really, really innocently.
Well, yes, but I mean, I've known enough people just a few people, but enough, who've done undercover work. And the word you used, Tawni, was engrossed. I mean, your job is to be engrossed, is to pretend you are literally another person. We could talk about the psychological mind fucking that does for yourself, much less for your marriage. And I know you write about, and Tawni writes about how, thoughtful and supportive, amazing partner, stopping you in the driveway and checking in before you come in and bring all that hate that you're immersed in and have to pretend that you share into your home. So my question is for both of you. Sorry, Matt, give me your kind of career resume. I mean, when did you get into this work and more specifically undercover work, more specifically with these types of groups?
Well, I was working gangs, and we were predominantly working Hispanic and Black gangs in Mesa, and we would travel to Phoenix and different places. But it wasn't until a skinhead tried to kill me. That was my first contact with anybody in a white power organization, and he tried to kill me. So that made me think, well, if he wants to kill me, then what's he want to do to other people? And then 3 weeks later, he ended up shooting another Mesa police officer in the back. So that's what springboarded me into looking into the hate group. So once I looked into that one, it just exploded from there. If you know what you're looking for, you will see it. And that's exactly what happened.
So take me through just a little bit of your law enforcement career. You're most of it's been there in Arizona, right?
Yeah. I've been Mesa police officer, which is in Arizona. I worked on 2 FBI task forces with both the Fugitive and the Joint Terrorist Task Force. And my undercover work, just because it was based in Arizona, but also I had contact with people in the Midwest, in California, on the East Coast, down in Florida, Australia, the UK, because hate travels. And because that hate travels, then, it's not like going down to the corner and buying a 20 rock off somebody. I'm talking to a guy in California, and the next thing you know, we're talking to a guy in the UK.
I want to come back to that work and really get into the book, but Tawni has had a really interesting career and issue that you have spent so much of your life dedicated to. Talk to me a little bit about how you got interested in the really important issue around polygamy and religious groups, and how you have kind of infiltrated that idea and ideology and the damage, of course, that it can do.
So you want the truth of that? I mean, we were actually working a skinhead group in Florida and met with a producer that wanted to do a show on Matt and me, which I had no interest in. And she started talking about these polygamous groups, and I knew I could help her do that. And so
a show on what that you had no interest in? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that word.
They wanted us to do a reality show with our family, and I just had zero interest in any of that kind of thing. But she was working these religious groups, and I knew I could help her. And I knew that if we tackled it like a investigation, like Matt and I had been doing, that we'd have some success. So what was the issue, and what were these religious groups? Well, she was working a polygamist. She was working on a polygamous show. She was a producer. And I said, I can help you. And when I had a 12-year-old daughter, and I had to help her. I knew I could help her. And I felt that need. When you know something, you got to do something.
The crazy thing with these polygamy groups, and it's what Tawni was able to find out, because I had no idea, but they're so deep rooted in hate and in racism and in the perfect race that it kind of flowed real evenly in what we were doing anyways. And so it was like, just in my opinion, it was like going from, a skinhead or Klan or Aryan Nations meeting, and next thing you know, you're going into the ideology of a polygamous group.
And I couldn't believe the extremism of hate that was meeting with the extremism of religion. And some of the girls even had, one of the girls had an iron cross. I said, do you know what that means? Why is this? Because an iron cross doesn't always mean that that's a hate symbol, but hers was 100% a hate symbol. So she had jumped from one extremist ideology to another.
It's a fascinating life that the two of you are living, and work that you are doing. Let me get more specific, though, just around this general issue. Hate is legal. You're allowed to feel hate. You're allowed, in many cases, to say why and how you hate things. And there's more places to say them than ever before. And so part of your work, I understand, is trying to help people not get radicalized, indoctrinated, understand their feelings and where they came from. And obviously, another part is real, actual legal work, which is to investigate and, if necessary, turn over to law enforcement or arrest these people and put them in jail. Let's talk about the differences there and how you can prevent someone that's going down the wrong road from going to jail, frankly, in the end, Matt.
Well, I think you hit on a lot of good topics there, a lot of good things.
Pick a thread wherever we go.
You're right. It's not illegal to hate. It's not illegal to not like your neighbor or anybody else. You can say and do whatever you want. It's not until you cross that line where you take the rhetoric and the ideology and then you create some violent act. Right. Once you go to the violent act, that's when law enforcement gets involved. But in order to fully get the reasons why the crime was committed or who committed the crime, you have to understand the ideology. And that's why when I went undercover, I was more of an intelligence guy. I was more gathering the intel on the groups and the people in the groups and knowing, okay, if this group believes in this group's a Christian identity, this group's anti-Muslim, and understanding when a crime is committed, which group go to, and then understand which person within that group committed the crimes. Because that's where your success comes, is understanding the ideology. Now, how do you stop that? Well, man, that's the question of the century. Yeah. How do you stop hate? You don't stop hate. What you can stop, though, is the violence that comes from the hate. I think one of the messages that we have in the book is, guys, we got to talk. We got to communicate. If there's no communication, there's going to be no resolution. And if there's no resolution, there's just going to be more and more violence.
Well, I wonder if you either misspoke or if you really believe that, because I think I disagree with you can't stop hate simply based on all these guys who are making TED Talks who are former white supremacists. I'm sure you know Christian Piccolini and many more. There are, in some cases, people who have made complete reversals and have dedicated their lives to, making things better. I'm not sure if that's if we're talking about the same thing, although I would agree with you. It's really hard, and it probably doesn't happen. In most cases, you're not a former white supremacist. You're probably hardened that way to the end of your life, sadly. But I wonder if you would give me more nuance at all.
Christian's a great guy. Christian, his story is amazing. Then you have, I personally know of, because I've worked sources that have stayed in the hate group, but they have been disenfranchised, or they want to get out and they want to make a difference. What I'm saying is, when you can't stop hate has been around since the beginning of time. And hate comes out of anger or out of misunderstanding of another culture or another person or another race. And that's the ideology, and that's the problem that we have. If we would spend the time, because if you go back in the Christian story, Christian actually went and talked to people within the Jewish community. He went to the music industry and did his things there. He opened his mind, and that changed him and caused him to get out of the hate scene. But
we personally have worked with several that have gotten out, that are highly successful, though not as vocal about it. So we absolutely know that you can reverse what has changed your mind and made you think differently in the hate radicalized way can also be reversed. Right. But it's been around since Adam and Eve. At least it's been chronicled since the beginning of time.
Oh, yeah, it's attractive, and I've felt it in my heart many times and in many ways about people and things, and myself even, right? So I hear you, and I think that's a great perspective to put on it. Let's talk about law enforcement itself, as well as military. I think this is such a important issue. You write about it. You have experience with this. It's hard to talk about because people get uncomfortable with it. I don't at all. After 9/11, law enforcement was looking into every single... You even looked Muslim. You could have been Spanish, Catholic, but if you even look Muslim, the rest of us were looking at folks too. We were all racist after 9/11 in New York City, where I live, to some extent. You'd always try to put a cap on that, check your bias, but it was really hard. Law enforcement, they went full on. They compromised the Constitution. They did illegal things with wiretapping investigation. They went overboard when it was Muslims and Al-Qaeda being the threat. To me, I never really, even being there on 9/11, thought that foreigners, period, much less foreign jihadists, much less foreign Muslims, were the most important threat. Because I also saw what Timothy McVeigh did. And it's much easier to commit a crime if you look like the rest of us, if you understand the rest of us, if you are us. One of the big issues with how much this ideology has infiltrated law enforcement, 17,000 law enforcement agencies in America. How bad do you think that is, so that they don't go after these guys because they don't see it as being as much of an issue? Or maybe they are part of it. Many of them are part of these actual groups. You give me your thoughts on it.
I'm going to jump in right there, because that was shocking to me, as the way that I grew up and the ideological way and Disney-esque way almost that I looked at law enforcement and my own husband. So when he started getting things about oath keepers, what you were working that kind of thing since the 90s. 94. And then he got a list with 32,000 law enforcement or military people that belonged to the oath keepers. It was beyond shocking.
It's an important number. Trying to put perspective on it, one way you can actually find membership or loyalty to these extremist groups, put a number on it, and then you can decide what adjective you want to use about how pervasive it is, Matt.
Well, the Oath Keepers are huge. It's whether you're an Oath Keeper or 3%er or a militia group, it really doesn't matter. It's a huge, and it all goes back to the ideology, is that if somebody's spewing the rhetoric of we're being invaded, we're allowing rapists and murderers and gangsters into our country, those are all trigger words for guys who have spent their lives protecting and serving. And so when they hear that, they take that oath of office seriously, and they go down to the border and they do everything they can do to stop the invasion or the immigration or whatever word you want to put on it.
Right.
And I tell you, in my undercover work, I was never worried about being burned by a Skin or a Nations or a Klansman or anything else. I was always worried that it was some cop who was there off duty because he had the ideology or the philosophies of this organization, was going to see me and go, Matt, what are you doing here? And that was my concern from the very beginning.
Wow.
And I can back it up with story after story of instances where people have told me, hey, Matt, or my undercover name was Patrick. Hey, Patrick, we're going to have, a person from Phoenix PD coming and talking to us, or we got a Mesa cop coming in to share stuff. Yeah, and so, you know what? It's truth. I don't, how do you stop that? It goes back to the ideologies of the people. You got to really look at the ideology and the intent of the people involved.
I mean, what about just having hiring practices as well as education opportunities to make sure members of law enforcement understand these issues, and that we have some kind of litmus test where you can ask them, you hold up a Confederate flag, like, what do you see? I mean, I don't know. I'm joking, but like hiring filters.
But you're not joking, because that's a great thing, because you hold up a Confederate flag. What do you see? That's a great question. But if you hold up a Confederate flag and what do I see in that person, that's totally different, because it's what we see in these people. It's what they try to hide their views and philosophies until they get on their own time. But the problem with being a police officer is that you're supposed to protect everybody, right? Not just the white race. You're supposed to protect everybody. And if you have those leanings or those ideologies, you're not going to. And it goes back to what we talked about earlier. You can have the ideology, but once it turns into violence, then it becomes illegal. You can have the ideologies, but once it hinders your job as a police officer, then we have a problem. Well,
yeah, that's the issue that I see here with this. It really is, and that's why I want to spend a little bit more time hearing your perspective on it, because if these groups, 3%ers, any militias, any organizations are weaponized in their training and their rhetoric, maybe they haven't committed violence yet, but if they look like it, those are the groups, obviously, you have limited resources that you want to infiltrate, that you want to have undercover agents. And best way to prevent a terrible attack or even a murder or conspiracy plot to kill somebody important is to have somebody on the inside, I'm guessing. I don't know much about law enforcement, but I've seen some movies, I've heard some things. Your work is so vitally important. But if you are potentially going to be radicalized by these ideas, you go into these meetings, you're a white guy and you're infiltrating white hate groups. You understand the problems that creates if so many of these people already believe or are vulnerable to being radicalized themselves. How do we bust white supremacists with white cops?
Well, here's just recently last week. Let's go back to the Provo, Utah, the guy that was shot and killed by the FBI. He was making threats against the president.
Right.
Military background. This guy was a military background. And the problem is that he has the training that the military provided him. And that's my problem when it comes to law enforcement and military. They have the training that a lot of people don't even have or can't even think about, but they're passing it along to these white power groups or these militia groups or whoever else. And that's my problem. One of my biggest problems is that as a police officer, now I don't know what I'm going against, because I don't know what cop or military guy has trained this extremist to do whatever he's going to do. And we found the same thing in polygamy. Polygamy is no different. They have their own security and militias too. So how do we stop it? We have to educate. We have to talk to the hiring boards and people. Education and communication is crucial and key in fighting hate, especially in stopping it in law enforcement. We need to provide a way and a means for people to express their views that we can understand and talk about, and hopefully we get people in the hiring process that are able to recognize, whoa, this guy's got this tattoo, this tattoo, this tattoo. His background is this. He's lied on his application. Boom. I mean, go back to the guy that I had kicked out of the academy in Mesa because he knew way too much about the white power movement. And he's the guy that showed up at my house wanting to confront me when I was holding my daughter. So, it's just this whole slippery slope thing. And it's trying to get in and tell people we are all people. I don't care what color, race, anything you are. If we cannot fix the things going on within this country, we're going to fall. Lincoln said it. We're going to lose ourselves.
Well, we have fallen. I think we've fallen. I think we're on the ground. We better get up and dust ourselves off because it's getting bad. And you guys have that perspective as much as anybody. You write about it specifically in your book, The Hate Next Door. You write about your undercover missions and operations, the things you saw, the groups that you infiltrated. And so let's get into some of it. How are they different? Tell me the difference between, one group and another group using your own experience.
Within the white power groups, it's your Christian identity, you're anti-Muslim, you hate. That's all it is. If you hate, you hate. The problem with all these groups is that they not only do they hate other races and religions, they hate themselves. And so if they'd actually get along with each other, we'd be in a lot bigger problem than we are now.
How serious, though? So the ideology that you kind of just touched on there, but at what point do we get concerned as a public, as a member of law enforcement, trying to stop violence? At what point do they become violent? At what point do you as an undercover officer say, I got to blow the whistle, got time to call it in?
Well, I think in 1983, when Robert Matthews went on a shooting spree across the country with the order, I think that's when we should have all had our heads pulled out and saw that there's a problem, because the violence is going continually every year. We can say mass shooting after mass shooting after mass shooting. And to say that white supremacy and the ideology of white supremacy is not really a big thing. Look at the last mass shootings. They've all been about.
Many of them have been, not all obviously, but many of the have been, certainly in El Paso, in Buffalo, in South Carolina with I don't say their names, any of the shooters, but yeah, they're absolutely. And I think those are more dangerous, more damaging, more something to be afraid of, hypothetically, especially if you're a member of a marginalized community, or you're even religious and go to worship, because then Al-Qaeda. That's my point. Like, I lived in New York on 9/11, and I'm not worried about Muslims. I'm worried about white supremacists if I'm certainly black or Jewish or Hispanic or gay. Your thoughts on my little rant?
No, I totally agree. I think we should be worried about white supremacy, because if you look back into it, the more police officers have been killed by the far right than anything else in the last 10 years. And so more people have been killed by far right extremism in the United States than Al-Qaeda members in the United States in the last, since 9/11.
That's a really important point. I wonder what happens when you make that point to general law enforcement and their families on Facebook, because I don't think it would go over well in my community.
But I tell you what, I am 100% behind law enforcement. I was a cop for 20 years. I believe in law enforcement. I support law enforcement, but I support good law enforcement. I don't support dirty cops. I don't support racist cops. I don't support them. They shouldn't be cops. But as I talk to good police officers and I train good police officers in seminars, we all have the same views and the same thoughts, is that it needs to stop.
Yeah, but go ahead, Tawni.
I think that what you were talking about earlier is like, what do we do? It cannot be tolerated, which is one reason that we wrote The Hate Next Door, is so that we could educate even law enforcement for law enforcement that, look, it cannot be tolerated in the smallest of forms. It's real, it's here, and it's infiltrated our own.
Man, I fully agree with that principle, and I think it's the most important principle. And I also think it's the one that most of us will never uphold, because when you are intolerant of hatred, you may be putting yourself in danger. You may be putting your family in danger, your career in danger. I mean, I have gotten in a lot of trouble being vocally against the hate in my town. You guys had horrible things happen to your family as a result of your work. I have a hard time, or have a nuanced or very empathic, I guess, reaction to those people who see hate and don't do anything because they're scared of what might happen, especially if they're a member of a marginalized community. And my point is, when we talk about law enforcement, even you see the hatred, you see the crimes within law enforcement, within the police department. There are white supremacists. They're all over the place. Remember, you're not going to say something, because if you do, you're putting your career and potentially your family in jeopardy. What about that?
Oh, are you kidding me? I've put and this is one of the things I feel horrible about. I put my family in more jeopardy than anybody else I know. And I'm right. It horrifies me. It really does. It adds to all the paranoias and thoughts and things that happen because of the job and the work that I've done. However, Tawni says it best. It's like when you go into a house and you shine a light on a cockroach, it's going to run. White supremacists or extremists are cowards. They hide behind their keyboards, they hide behind their computers, and they spew their hate, and then they close their keyboards and they close their computers and don't do anything else. It's the ones that are affected by what that person just said that go out and commit the violence. It's not coming from the guy who said it. It's coming from the people who he affects. And that's the people we need to stop. We need to shine a light on hate. We need to shine a light on corruption in law enforcement. We need to shine a light on mental health in law enforcement. We need to shine a light everywhere we possibly can to make a difference. And I think in the book, we hit on, post-traumatic PTSD. We hit on corruption in law enforcement. We hit on politicians that I had problems with because I was fighting hate in Arizona. And all these things we're shedding a light on because we want to make a difference. Otherwise, I just put my family in more danger by putting out.
What's it all for? Otherwise, what's it all for? Yeah. Well said.
And Pete, I refused I refused to raise my children in fear.
Yeah.
And if you know something, you were placed for whatever reason into this position, you have to do something. And that's when I say it cannot be tolerated. It cannot be tolerated. And if I'm strong enough or for whatever reason, have the reason that I can say that, and I need to share it. Because someone's going to listen and it's going to change in their own way.
I share your values on this. I think I've practiced them. I will say my wife doesn't. And I will say I don't blame people who don't. Like, that's what I think about when I read your book. I'm like, the only reason they can stay together is because they both see a real value and purpose in the work that they're doing, even with the danger it puts their family in. I don't blame someone who says, you know what? I didn't sign up for this. I didn't sign up to put my kids in danger. Like, I never would argue with my wife about that. It is always such a delicate thing when I put myself out there and say something that can and has brought us some damaging knocks on our door, to say the least. I've talked about it before, and will obviously again openly. But
law enforcement signed up for it.
If you remember, if you're the spouse of a law enforcement member, I think you know what you signed up for. My wife married a comedian who became an activist. So
that's different. But law enforcement, I'm saying the men and women in blue signed up for it, and it cannot be tolerated in our law enforcement community. I couldn't agree more with you. You put a lot of people behind bars. Matt, tell me about how you infiltrated an organization and end up with an actual arrest and a conviction.
Wow, first of all, after the skinhead tried to kill me, I became a member of the National Alliance, and when I became a National Alliance member, I then went to the meetings and was able to deal with and meet with the different people from all over guys from California were there, Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, all over the place, came to these meetings, and I was able to get to know who the people were. You talk to them, you have conversations, you know what they're about, what the ideologies are. And then a group of these skins that I was working into, they ended up killing a guy. That was a little guy at the wrong place at the wrong time. After a fight inside a bar, some skinheads were kicked out and they brutally beat this guy to death, kicked him, boot partied him, and just destroyed. It was horrible what they did to this young kid.
And he was a white kid.
Yeah, and it was. Yeah. That is the violence and the rage that these guys had. And from my work and my intelligence and everything I knew, knowing these guys, I was able to work with Phoenix PD, and we were able to get these guys picked up and locked up, and they're serving time in prison. And you know what's unfortunate, though, is they're getting out soon. And
prison doesn't reform your views on hate.
Are you kidding me? Prison, you have a choice, man. You have a choice in prison. Either you can go straight and get your ass kicked by everybody, or you click up with the white boys. And a lot of these guys clicked up with the white guys, and now they're either Brotherhood or they're prison skins or there's something like that. The hatred builds. While we were writing the book, we had another death threat come in from that group that I just mentioned that I locked up for murder. And so it never stops. And my philosophy is, listen, if you got a problem with me or what I've done, let's have a talk about it. I caught you. It's like when we're little kids, we're playing cops and robbers. Hey, Johnny, I caught you. Now let's switch roles and I'm going to hide from you and you try to catch me. That's all being a cop was. That's all. I caught you. Go to jail, do your time, get out, and live productive life. But they don't do that. They just live and live and live and hate.
It's crazy what you've seen and what you've experienced, both of you now. You've mentioned twice that a skinhead tried to kill you. The first time you mentioned it, I should have allowed you to explain that, because that would have been a great way to start. But I mean, what happened?
Well, I was coming back from working at Phoenix Task Force. Our Mesa gang, went to Phoenix. There's the West Side City Crips were shooting at Phoenix cops, so we went over there. I was on my way back into Mesa. Just a motor officer checks off on traffic, and the truck ran from him. And so I was in the area, so I thought, what the heck, I'll help him out. And so foot pursuit starts. I'm paralleling on one street. They're coming towards me. I turn the corner, pitch black. Trees on both sides, is kind of an eerie feeling along the side of this house. I shine my flashlight up, and there's this guy running towards me, shaved head, white T-shirt, Doc Marten boots, and, Mesa Police. As I pull my badge out, I remember I took my vest off, and just then he lifts up his shirt and he pulls a gun out of his pants and sticks it in my chest. And then I thought, oh crap, I have no vest on. It's done. I'm gone. And we start fighting over the gun. It seemed like it was forever. A typical movie fight where you feel like you're getting thrown around through windows and walls. And, I got the gun away from him. He went to jail. And then the story goes on from there.
The movie might have ended with you getting the gun and shooting him, but you didn't shoot him.
No, didn't end up shooting him. No. Could have justified it. Would completely justified, but the reality is it happened so fast. I had no time to pull my gun.
Right.
And it was just, it went to hands.
Back on that day, I remember you telling me you didn't want to pull your gun. Mm. He said he knew he could tackle him. He's a football player. He knew, I'll tackle this dude instead.
Yeah. You look like a big guy.
Well, that before my back surgery, I was 6'4", and now, back then I was maybe a little thinner and better shape, but yeah, I would go up against anybody. I wasn't worried about it, but
it's always a weird thing. And you could speak to this, but as a small guy, I've always been like, I'm annoyed by big guys who carry guns. Like, really? Do you really need the gun? Like, you're twice the size of me, Matt. And so but I can make a more serious point, which is, you being the big guy that you are, who were you? What was your character as an undercover when you infiltrated these groups? Here comes big white Matt.
Yeah, I was a landscaper.
Or Pat.
I own my own landscaping company. And what it was that all the Hispanics and Mexicans I had that worked for me stole all my equipment and took it to Mexico.
That was the story that you told?
That was the story throughout the whole thing.
And that's what kind of radicalized you into wanting to do something about that.
And because the Mexicans stole my equipment and went to Mexico, my business has been faltering, and I've been pissed off ever since. And my hatred towards the immigration and Mexicans were all based upon that.
I think I don't even buy that story. Like, I would have been like, hey, man, they took your weed whacker and went all the way across the border with it. Like, what was that worth to them? 3
weed whackers, 4 lawnmowers, and a truck and trailer.
So they stole a truck with all this equipment to what? Sell it or start an amazing landscaping company in Guadalajara?
You know what? Nobody asked. all they heard was the fact that I was mad because the Mexicans stole my stuff. Yeah. That's all they needed to hear. I have anger. I have hatred. Right. Come on in, Patrick. We accept you.
Wow. And so you were able to keep up that story for how long at the longest time? How does that develop, and how do you not become that?
Oh, the hater?
Yeah.
I have a wife that supported me. I have a family that supported me. I had, when I came home, I'd sit in my driveway in my truck just to decompress and get the hate out of my head. And it was Tawni that would come out slowly integrating real life back into me.
Amazing.
Yeah, and I tell you this is that if it wasn't for Tawni and the kids, I wouldn't be sitting here. And that is the reality of what the job did to me personally. And I'm just grateful that, Tawni took the time to understand what was going on.
What a great partner and partnership. I love this. You guys should do just a podcast or show about your marriage. It's wonderful. Seems great.
Well, I mean, on pay, you know. I mean, we're married. We've been married a long time. We've been through the ins and outs of all of that. But the work he was doing was so important that I felt like my contribution to the work was exactly what I did.
Tawni's like, let's keep it real. It's not all rainbows and flowers, okay? We're two people who've been together for a long time with a family, and we deal with fairly stressful work. Okay.
My grandmother said, I took up fishing, Tawni, you took up hate. So I don't know.
Well, listen, Matt was just named after his grandmother. Going undercover, apparently the FBI restricts those assignments to 2 years or fewer. So what do you think about that and why those limits are imposed?
Oh, you know what? I was mad when I first heard about it. Like, don't take away what I love doing. And then after thinking about it, I wholeheartedly 100% support it. The work, law enforcement work itself takes a toll on you. It takes a toll on the officer. But to put yourself in a situation of the constant lies and the constant paranoia and the constant fears that you're going to be found out, it takes it out of you. And you really shouldn't be doing that very long. I think I did it too long. I really do. And it's just, again, I have the support of Tawni and my family. A lot of cops, they lose their wives, they lose their families, they become alcoholics, they, some type of addiction, and eventually they end up taking their own lives. And that's the stuff that's got to stop. So,
yes, and I think that's, I wanted to mention this earlier, you give me an opportunity now. Everything you just said and everything we were talking about earlier with these mental health issues especially is affecting the veterans community, and you write about that, that as well. So I think it's always worth mentioning. And, the issue here is, listen, I, as a 47-year-old man dealing with issues about my career, my marriage, my purpose, my kids going off to college, what does that mean? Like, I have my own stuff. What I don't have is a gun or expert training in a gun. And that's how most men kill themselves, with guns. So if you take the guys who know guns, know their way around guns, sometimes those, obviously way too often. So I just wanted that PSA. I know you know a lot about that. I don't know if you want to add anything to that before I ask you another question.
150 cops so far, or no, it was at least over 50 cops so far this year have killed themselves. So it needs to stop.
It was like 20 a day in the veterans community. I always had a hard time believing that number, but you don't have to go far to hear about one. So it is a lot. Let me ask you.
These guys aren't robots, and our minds are not equipped to go from call to call or scene to scene what these guys see.
Right.
And I think that it's important that we as a community support that. If there's a problem, let's give them the support they need on the other end as well.
By the way, I've been researching this, one issue for a pretty long time. I've talked with all kinds of different experts around it. And if you want to call it sexual abuse or trafficking, and everything around that. And one of the issues that I think comes up, and I think law enforcement has to deal with this themselves and the public themselves, is sometimes we make a bigger issue out of something, and that is a distraction and a disservice. I don't think we are making a big enough issue about all of the things that you've been talking about and writing about in your book, white supremacy and terrorism and domestic terrorism and hate groups in this country. But I do have to ask you what your thoughts are, if you have any at all, both of you especially, on this issue of human trafficking. My entire life as a parent, other parents, I think, have been bad parents because they've been too worried to let their kids out because they think their kid's going to get kidnapped. And I've always said to them, you don't know somebody who even knows somebody who knows somebody whose kid has been kidnapped. When a kid gets kidnapped, like by a stranger, it's huge news. You know her name, Elizabeth Smart. And you can talk about the polygamy groups there if you want. But my point is, this new movie, Sound of Freedom, is a complete canard bullshit based on a false story and a guy who's a total self-promoter named Tim Ballard, and stars Jim Caviezel, who's a Catholic. And all I want to say to those two guys is, if you actually care about sexual abuse, you should look in your Catholic and Mormon churches, because that's happening a lot more there than it is in Honduras, where you're sending an ill-prepared group of ragtag former militia guys to go in and arguably entrap a kid. End of rant. Thoughts?
Well, I'll just say this.
Like, kidnapping happens. We should be serious and concerned about sex trafficking and sexual abuse. But let's keep our eye on the target and support the groups that are actually doing that work, not those that are self-promoters.
And that's why I'll just say this one thing. When you talk about polygamy, polygamy is the biggest thing of human trafficking there is. If you want to stop human trafficking, go to any polygamous organization who has young girls born into their groups with the sole purpose of being trafficked or moved around from state to state, country to country, to be married to older men and to satisfy whatever need these older guys have, all in the name of religion. So I think Tawni, in the work that she's done, she's exposed it. She's talked to these survivors of trafficking. And is it legit? Yes. Human trafficking is legit. Is it legit within religious organizations? 100%. I will die on the sword saying that these polygamous groups are nothing but human traffickers. And so I agree. We need to do something. Well,
that being said, let me just say it more succinctly one time. I live in Rockland County, New York. Mm-hmm. Do you think, just off the top of your head, a white girl has been kidnapped and trafficked in my county ever, if this year or even the last decade? Would you think, knowing what you know?
I would say no.
And I would say yes, because there's things that we just don't know that's going on behind closed doors, but not at the extent that it's.
I would say no, because if a kid, I mean, you have to prove that hypothetical to me. Again, this is all hypothetical, only because if a white girl went missing and we knew she was sex trafficked, that family would want the world to know, and law enforcement would get real criticism if they didn't report it to the rest of the families. And we have so many people in my community and other communities screaming about what happened at the mall and their kids are getting snatched. And I want to tell them, you're destroying your child, especially young girls' independence and confidence, if you tell them they can't go outside because they're going to get kidnapped when it hasn't happened. It actually has not happened.
Right.
100% agree with that, because that's how I raised my children. I mean, that they were allowed to ride their bikes and get hurt and do all those kind of things. It's
knowing what you know, that's a credit to you, because I think people like you have more of a reason to be concerned. But if you check again that bias to the statistics and realize what you're doing to your kid when you don't let them, walk the dog.
Well, we refuse to, like I said, live in fear, and that creates all kinds of fear, unnecessary fear, I think.
You got to understand too. Our son read the book. And I think some of our biggest critics were going to be our kids and my mom and different people who read the book. And he said to us, I understand now why it was so hard for you to let us ride our bikes to the corner, or why it was so hard for you to do this and to do this. But they said, you know what? I got to give you credit, though, because you let us go to different punk shows and you let us go to different concerts that we were interested in.
Right.
And it's because we talked to them and they understood what right is, what wrong is, what hate is, what love is. And so you gotta put a base level, whether we're talking about human trafficking or hate or criminality in general. There's a certain level that everybody needs to understand. And once you go past that level, then that's where the problem's created.
I certainly love the way you think.
Well, it's proven right anecdotally, and I think in plenty of scholarly ways. I'm glad I was educated on that when I was a young parent of girls, because my daughter's going off to college Thursday, and she's so ready to get out of here, and she's so independent and confident, and she's so not worried about irrational things, that are most likely not going to happen to her, but yet vigilant and aware of them as much as you can do. And I just think that we do a real disservice to our kids when we clip their wings and we create all kinds of fear around things that, but I get your concern too. I mean, I think it's a nuanced thing. And I don't agree with allowing your son to go to a punk show. Obviously, I'm not that kind of a parent, but
it's all you gotta let those wings fly.
I'm just kidding. I don't know anything about music, and my audience got that joke.
The thing is that when it comes to human trafficking, I don't think anybody understands it better at the level than Tawni does, because of who she's worked with.
Yeah.
He speaks to girls who have been trafficked, who have left it, who have been part of this whole thing.
But to your point, these are not girls that we're going to know their names, because these are closed secret societies. Mm-hmm. but the ones that are happening out in your community and mine, we're going to know about.
Yes, and that's the point. It's not really happening. And if it were, law enforcement would be all over it. I mean, somebody just posted on Facebook that, oh, this happened at the mall and somebody tried to snatch a kid. And I was like, there's no way. I don't have to read anymore. There's no way it happened, because if that happened at a mall, there's a billion cameras. You'd have the license plate. Police would at least know that it happened. And of course, they didn't know that happened. They weren't notified. It was something that someone's so irrationally concerned about. It was a stranger, approached somebody, like, would you like to come to my Bible study? Because they were a crazy religious person, but they weren't trying to snatch your kid and send them into trafficking the way that the Sound of Freedom and certain other voices are making you think. They're just, people came to my door yesterday and knocked on the door and tried to indoctrinate me into Jehovah's Witness. Guy handed me a pamphlet on the sidewalk. Like, it's happening. They're not trying to snatch me or my kids. That's just happening this week in my town. It's like, come on, stop it. Your kid's not getting snatched at the mall in traffic. That's a fucking Liam Neeson movie.
No, that's you're expressing your concern and your concern the same way I express mine when it comes to hate.
Well, good. I mean, yeah. I just hope I don't know if you disagree with me, by all means, tell me. But I mean, the bigger issue there on the border is labor trafficking, people being trafficked for their actual labor and forced into that kind of a thing. And that needs to be focused on. But just wanted to ask you about the hatred behind immigration. I mean, you watch guys follow guys to the border to shoot and kill Mexicans, human beings like they were tin cans. Tell me about, what it's like down there in Arizona, the feelings around all of the issue. I mean, we're being told we are being invaded.
Yeah, invaded is a big word that I don't necessarily buy. I think invaded is with
people who want to mow your lawn.
Yeah, invaded is a rhetoric word that they're using to motivate people to go down to the border and take up arms and to do what they can do. Not too long ago, I was invited to go to New Mexico to sit on the border on a sniper team to shoot at immigrants coming across the border. And it was one of those things. It's like, guys, I actually said, all right, I got to stop right now. I'm a retired cop and this is what you're doing. And before I could finish it, they said, if you're a retired cop, that's great. We would love to have you come and train our people and do all this. And then at that point in time, I said, man, I can't do this. And I talked to some people and some things happened. But
you don't want to unpack things that happened with those guys? No,
it's somebody's in jail and
Good.
It is what it is. But the border in Arizona is not like what people think. It is 3 strands of barbed wire, and you can cross. And there's roads on the Mexico side coming up to the strands of barbed wire, and there's foot trails on the Arizona side. There's a lot of people coming across the border, but my concern with the people coming across the border is not the human trafficking side. I would say it's the drug side. It's the fentanyl. It's the meth. It's everything coming across the border that is hurting our communities and killing our kids. And that's what I think needs to be.
But the vast majority of human beings that are coming across the border, like 99% of them, are coming here for, if we want to be super general, a better life. They're not coming here to commit crimes.
They're from Guatemala, want a job just to send money home to the parents.
Yeah.
That's the majority of the immigrants that I've spoken to are just guys that are looking for a better life, want to make some money to send to their family. And
the solution there is comprehensive immigration reform. And that would have to go through Congress. And we don't have a country or we have one political party that would never allow that. So no matter what you gave them, they just won't allow it because it's such a great divisive fundraiser, including for a lot of these groups that, they don't want to normalize or legalize or make a pathway to citizenship, much less let the kids who are born here, babies, become citizens. They don't want that. They just don't. There's no arguing with them. They don't. They'll never allow for it. And you infiltrated these groups in this ideology, right?
Yeah. I mean, I had sources that were loading magazines for their ARs to go down to the border and shoot at people. I've worked with a guy who founded 2 border groups. He would go down to the border, have their special ops to stop the immigration. I know of 7 murders that have happened at the border from these guys. And one of them, JT Reddy, we talk about JT extensively in the book. JT, He was always at the border. and then he ended up killing a family of 4, then killing himself. He's a coward, and that's the way he decided to go out. And it's just the border issue is huge when you're talking about the far extreme ideologies, because it's the rhetoric that everybody gets behind is we're being invaded. I'm a white nationalist. We're being invaded. We need to stop the influx of gang members in our communities. Yeah. And it brings in a bigger, broader group of people to go down and fight to fight the smuggling and everything else at the border.
Yeah, these independent, militarized, quote, patriots. You're talking about those groups. We've heard about them, read about them, but most of us have not been down there or seen what.
Yeah. Again, I talk about it in the book. I went down and became a member of the Minuteman Militia. And while sitting there, an old guy, probably in his mid-60s, sits down next to me, and I go, "Hey, how you doing?" And small talk. He goes, "Are you here for the week?" I go, "No, I'm just down here for a couple of days." He goes, "Oh, I brought my new motorhome down. I'm here for the week." I go, "Yeah, where are you from?" "Well, I'm from the LA area. I'm a police chief in this town called Compton, and I'm tired of all the stuff going on in my community that is caused by the immigration issue and these Mexicans." He said, "These dirty Mexicans coming into our country." And I went, "You work where?" And he goes, "I'm a police chief there." And so I'm thinking, okay, yeah, you're full of crap. A police chief, an actual sitting police chief is going to be at the border. I go back to my police chief who worked LAPD. He was assistant for LAPD. I said, "Do you know this guy?" And he goes, "Yeah, he's the chief of Compton." And so that's who we had at the border. That's what the rhetoric causes at the border.
Oh, man, I could talk to you guys forever. Let me just close on one solution. You offer solutions in the last chapter of your book. Both of you, I'd love to hear from on that. And then we'll schedule more time when I finish the book, I hope, if you want to, because I've really enjoyed this conversation and your patience with my couple of rants there. But, Tawni, what would you offer as a solution to either the issue that you work on a lot, polygamy, and all the terrible things that are happening there, or anything else that we've talked about or that you wrote about in the book?
Well, it's the hate next door because it's all around us. And once you look and you can see, you'll see it around yourself too. And you also see solutions that you yourself as a ordinary American citizen can do to change the hate rhetoric and ideologies around us. But our kids people are looking for a place to belong. It's the same old adage. And so we need to give them a place to belong. We have to care enough to include and be Americans and be a family, be a community, and give that kid a lacrosse stick, a football, and, give them a mentor.
You're
of
talking.
love.
Yeah, no, I don't mean to interrupt you, but when they don't have a place to belong, I think what you're saying is they often end up in a place online and then maybe in real life that's in one of these radicalized group. And that could be of any ideology. If they don't belong into some. So you're saying what we can do is offer them opportunities to be part of as many different things. It's hard for kids who have issues around socializing or they're, marginalized or bullied, and then they find themselves not belonging. Is that what you're?
Oh, it's 100% what I'm saying. And what was so shocking is that some of these kids that were radicalized that Matt was working with, their parents were doctors and lawyers and what you would not normally think is going to be attracted to these kind of hate groups. And they were right in the middle of it. Yeah, so as parents, be aware. As teachers, be aware. As politicians, be aware. We can do better. We have to give these kids mentors and that we care about them so that they don't go to a hateful place.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like one thing I feel like we didn't have growing up is we were all frustrated that we couldn't get laid. We didn't go online and find other young men who also couldn't get a girl to kiss them or worse or more or better. And now we have this really, I'm making jokes about the fact that it's pretty normal to not succeed with a woman intimately for everybody. You have to know how to deal with that as opposed to these groups now that are blaming women and actually becoming violent towards women. I'm not sure how much of a thread the kind of incel ideology was in any of these groups, Matt, but that's another thing of just not belonging. And then you go online and you find a whole bunch of other young guys and the ideology that says it's the woman's fault.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's whether it's the woman's fault, whether it's the black race, the Jews, or whoever's fault, doesn't really matter. It's the blaming somebody else for the way that you're feeling. And that's the big thing is that this when you talk solutions, there's so many different things that we can do. We come from a football family. We have 2 of our boys play college football, and we love football. And our boy last year, they took state in Arizona.
Wow.
The hardest division there is, like in the top 10 in the nation divisions. Anyways, at the beginning of the season, the coach brought everybody together. He brought every race, every religion, every ethnicity, sat them down in a room and says, you do not leave this room until you understand this person, this person, this person. And they won state because they understood each other. And they went on the field and they played like they were true brothers. And if we can just take that example and go to our leaders, like Senate, Congress, whether it's state, national, whatever, we need to stop that problem.
I hear you, and I think it's a great example. People can criticize sports and team sports if they want for different things, but it's hard, or even organized religion. But I think the community aspect of team sports and organized religion is something that's great, and especially when that community is itself diverse in many ways. But I feel like you made me ask me one more question. You talked about if we can get some kind of unity in government, and I think I leave politics aside a lot. And I blame them less than media, because I'm a member of media and I've been involved in corporate media my entire life. The way to make a lot of money, the way to be really successful is to be super opinionated. Everything is black and white, literally binary, and that is what certainly our right wing media has become. That's radicalized so many of us. What do you think about media's role, and what did you hear? I mean, you must have been at meetings hearing guys quoting whatever their favorite, Tucker Carlson, Alex Jones, Democrats are lizard people types.
Well, I mean, I've been listening to Alex Jones since I started my undercover career, because he was the only thing around, and so you hear that, but now it's gone mainstream. Everybody I was just watching the news this morning. I'm not going to say what channel because I flip them around just because I want to know what's going on, and it's all the same stuff. There's no news. It's everybody complaining about this and arguing about this. And they get experts on to promote their agendas and what they're saying. And the problem is that I'm listening to it and I'm getting upset. And then if I start saying things, my kids will hear it.
Sure.
And if my kids are going to take that same anger I have. And that's how this whole cycle starts. Media, I hated the media when I was doing my undercover work. I hated the media when I was in law enforcement. Yeah. And now the crazy thing is I'm part of the media. We put out a book. Tawni's a producer for a TV show. I've been on the TV show. I'm part of the whole media aspect of it all. And it's frustrating because we got to do something.
If we rile up the extremes, which is exactly what's happening to support our bases, the rest of us are left in the middle somewhere without a home. And we're hoping that this book gives a home to things that we can all do to combat the problem and brings us together, because it really is love, though it's trite and simplistic, that is the antidote to hate.
Well, love doesn't make as much money is my point.
It should. But what love does is saves lives.
It does, indeed.
Love will stop mass shootings. Love will stop the anger to promote. Yep. I mean, look at Dylan Roof. I mean, nobody knew who Dylan Roof was until he killed the people in Charleston. Nobody knows who these people are until they kill the people they're killing.
Right.
And what difference would it have made for them if somebody, like Tawni said, gave him a football, gave him a baseball, gave him a paintbrush or a saxophone or a guitar, whatever it is.
Do you have thoughts, being on both sides of this as an undercover and as a law enforcement, on the role that guns play and what we could do to prevent those guns from getting into these, domestic terrorists? Because you can get anything you want. You can kill as many people as you want.
Well, that's interesting, too, because all the murders I worked as an undercover guy, there was not one gun ever involved. There were beatings, there were stabbings, they were trying to cut your head off, boot parties. And it wasn't until later on when these frustrated people who are self-radicalized online, they're the guys that are going after the guns. They're the guys, they're don't take this wrong, but they're little guys who would get their asses kicked by anybody on the street. So how do they protect themselves? They got to get a gun and 13
That was
mags.
So demeaning to me. And you knew, I had already told you I'm 5'8". No, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. Often it's the case. They're these scrawny little guys. That's what my point earlier was, like a big guy with a gun. Come on, that's even worse. You can understand why the scrawny guy gets a gun because he can't protect himself, whatever, not to excuse it. But yeah, based on the fact that you mentioned the Charleston shooter, they're all able to get guns. They're not always as a result of hate, and as you said, both said, it's hate of themselves almost always. But do you think that there are, I mean, you're not an expert on this, I'm not an expert, but do you see laws that would make it harder for there to be a weapon gotten?
Well, that's a great question. I don't know how much harder you can make it.
I mean, our last name is Browning.
Yeah, I mean, my great uncles found our Browning firearms.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh! And you weren't named after him?
Nah, my dad didn't want to name me John Moses. He named me after his mom.
Oh, probably good. Well, okay. So you don't. So what you're saying is that, like, you don't actually see laws that could make it harder for people to get the type of people that you infiltrated to get their hands on firearms.
Let's break it down. Convicted felons, you're not supposed to get guns. Convicted felons are not supposed to purchase guns.
Yeah.
You have the psychological evals that are supposed to, if somebody's honest on the paperwork and they say that, yeah, I've been arrested or I have psychological issues, they're not supposed to be sold a gun. You have the waiting period. You have all this stuff. But then also, if you go to your neighbor who's happens to be selling his 30-06 and you buy it for $200, none of that happens. And so what can you do? I think what they're doing now is pretty much as far as what can be done. I think they're doing a good job at it. We just can't stop the criminal side of it.
I'm shocked that you would say that. I could not disagree with you more on it, but without belaboring that.
But see, here's the thing, Pete. This is where communication and conversation comes in, because I can say things to enlighten you, and you can say things to let me know, hey, Matt, you know what?
No. I mean, like, I'll call you. We'll talk about this off the air. We'll have a thoughtful argument. I'll make my arguments. You'll make yours. And then maybe we'll talk about it again on the air. But, like, I mean, at this point, everybody knows my feelings. I have people on this issue all the time. And whether we disagree on that, which I think is a big disagreement to have, I still want to keep obviously talking. Yeah, I mean, that's the yeah.
But the problem is Second Amendment's real, and I don't know, really, honestly,
the problem is the Second Amendment is real. I don't understand.
Yeah, I don't either. As a police officer,
yeah,
I see that guns can be harmful and extremely and can promote and kill, do all this stuff. As a police officer, I can also see how they protect.
No doubt about it. But I mean, I always feel like I'm surprised when police officers aren't more on the side of gun control and gun regulation, because so many of them are going to be at the tip of the spear than I certainly would be. I'm always like, really? You're not? You
got to look at who we're going against that has guns. The people we're going against that have guns are getting their guns illegally. They're getting their guns through burglaries or robberies.
But they're not in almost any of the cases that we already talked about. Though they got those guns legally, and you know more than I do about this. And so I'm not going to sound like an arrogant prick. But like, what was the shooting? Wasn't it in Texas where those kids, the school in Texas where those kids all got shot, and the cops stayed outside? Like that kid got
disgusting.
That was Florida.
All those places, Florida, all those places, almost every one of them, I think they got their guns legally, and the cops had better guns, better training, more people, and in some cases they're afraid to go in. Like, I think that's pretty obvious.
Now we're on the same page on that. I totally agree with you.
I think I can sway you on this. We'll talk again. Everybody should check out the book. I'm holding it up. The Hate Next Door. I've really appreciated you guys joining me, and I want to talk more with you about this and all the other things that we touched on. Great conversation. I'll let you go, but thank you so much. And I think I've went way over my time, so I'm very grateful.
Appreciate it, Pete.
All right, there you go. The Hate Next Door is the book. Undercover within the new face of white supremacy, Matt and Tawni Browning. Go check them out. Check out the book. Follow them on social media. Let them know that you heard him here. Let me know what you thought of that conversation. Some disagreements there. We kept talking at the end. It was really cordial. Tawni paid me a very nice compliment about how much she enjoyed the conversation, the way I conducted myself. So that felt good. Hopefully it felt good to you, and I would love to hear from you. standupwithpete@gmail.com. What you like, what you don't like, and what you'd like to hear on the program. And I can't do the program without your support, so sign up for a paid subscription right now at patreon.com/PeteDominic, standupwithpete.com. Read review on all of the podcast platforms, iTunes, Spotify. Follow me on the social media networks, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, all of the rest. And that is all I've got for you. John Carroll taking us out right now as he does each and every day.
Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. You got to rise up, you got to stand up, you got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear and all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. Point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Oh, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We got to let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. While you lying awake wondering where the money all went, it'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right. We got to speak up, we got to reach up, and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up, stand up. Stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up. People got the power. Stand up. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Stand